If you've ever felt that Agile's too fluffy, too fuzzy, too vague to be appropriate for your environment, it's too much government, too much risk, too many variables that need to be kept in line, and too many measures that need to happen for it to be safe, keep watching. This is the video for you. There's a misconception all over the place that when you have governance, when you have risk, when you have things you need to look after, when things can't go wrong, when you can't afford to fail, that's when you should use project management with high rigor, great documentation, and not Agile, because Agile's too woolly, it's not documented enough, it's just not rigorous enough to function well in those environments. And I'm happy and sad, to tell you that that's not quite right. Agile works fantastically well in those environments. In fact, I have worked in medical devices, I worked in heavy engineering, I worked in literal life and death environments using Agile. Because Agile is just our approach to it. It's not the nitty-gritty of how we do the work. In fact, I like to say that, yeah, sure, you plan in project management. Of course, we have a project plan and we look into it and we try and keep it on track and manage the risks to make sure it stays on track. But if you're doing Agile well, you're actually planning much, much more. In fact, I would say if you're doing Agile well, you're planning at least once a day, probably more. The difference is that when we're working with Agile, we're working in environments where we know that we can't predict the entire journey from day one, or sometimes even from day 500. So we need to constantly replan and adjust. Like my favorite project manager ever said, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. You know, Mike Tyson, fantastic project manager. And a great quote, because it's very true. Our plans look beautiful and perfect and fantastic until we actually try and implement them, especially in complex environments where suddenly everything goes wrong. And another fantastic quote to share with you from a video game of all things is, a plan is a list of things that will go wrong. Sound familiar? Probably means you've worked with an amount of complexity in life before. So what does this mean then? Well, this is where that empirical process comes in with Agile. Agile is based on empiricism. And empiricism, if you're unaware, is the foundation for the scientific process. And I don't know about you, but I tend to consider science to be pretty rigorous in its evidence and structure. So empiricism is based on three fundamental pillars: transparency, making stuff visible; inspection, analyzing it, having a look at it, seeing what it's telling us; and three, very importantly, adaptation. The two without any of the other ones is of no real value. You have to have all three. You need to be able to see the real data, have a look at it and analyze it and see what it's telling you, and then do something about it. Without any of those three steps, you're wasting your own and everyone else's time. So Agile done well means that you practice empiricism with purpose and discipline. And that means a lot of planning and gathering data, making things transparent and inspecting them so we know what to do next, what adaptations to pull on going forward. Here we go, I'm going to take a moment. When you look at different frameworks then, different approaches to achieving agility, because Agile itself isn't an approach, it's kind of a state you get to, an ability to survive, an approach, a point of view, a mindset, a lot of people call it. Well, if you look at any of them, they're all consisting of that empirical process. In fact, some of you might know that Scrum has 5 events. One of my terrible jokes is, what do you call the 5 events? Well, that's right. You call them inspect and adapt, inspect and adapt, inspect and adapt, inspect and adapt. And that's right, inspect and adapt. Because you keep doing that over and over again. That's what all the events are there for. Scrum is set up to help you go through that empirical process loop and set clear goals so you know where you're heading, and to check in frequently to make sure you're actually getting there. But it's purposefully incomplete and it's lightweight so that you fill in the gaps that you need. A very common one that I face is, well, we have all this governance, right? We need to do all these things. We have compliance, we have risk, all these things we need to adhere to. Fantastic, make it visible. If you're using Scrum, add it to your definition of done. Are you doing Kanban? Make it a policy for one of your flow states. Absolutely. You should be ensuring that anything that is required from a governance, risk or compliance point of view, etc., is made visible, made transparent, and that we inspect every piece of work before it is considered done to make sure those things have been ticked off the list. And if you do Agile well, guess what? You're going to be even more compliant, even more governance adhering than you were before. And you're probably going to be able to do it better as well if you're working with complex work. But just like bad project management, bad Agile will still lead you to problems. It's not a silver bullet. None of this is going to magically solve things for you. You still have to do the work. But it's setting up a structure for you to do this with discipline, with rigor. And it's still going to be painful. It's still going to be a lot of work. You're still going to have to go through it. But if you do gather the data, you make it transparent, and you inspect and adapt, regardless of approach, you're going to get some pretty cool stuff happening. So what are some of the kinds of data, some of the kinds of input, some measures that we like to look at? Well, there's all kinds. Most of you will have heard of velocity or throughput, and yeah, they're fine. Not a huge fan of velocity myself, but that's a whole different debate. But they are more output measures. They are measures of how much stuff are we getting done. They don't actually tell us anything about the quality of the work necessarily. They don't tell us about the value of the work, even more importantly. So it's almost a vanity metric. It can be useful, and we can use it to make longer term predictions using probabilities and forecasting methods like the cone of uncertainty or Monte Carlo simulations. But other measures we want to look at is, okay, well, how long does it take us to go from idea to a release? Right? Whether you call that lead time or cycle time, that's up to you. Depends on which church you go to, so to speak. Are you measuring how often you release? Are you measuring your customer satisfaction? Are you using something like evidence-based management, where you're looking at unrealized value and current value, your ability to innovate, and your time to market? Evidence-based management is a fantastic complementary approach that is intended for complex environments, for environments where actually standard metrics might not help you. You need to figure out different measures to help you navigate that tricky world of, we thought this was valuable, but now that we got it out the door, people didn't like it. And that's the tricky part with complex work. It's the tricky part with product development is, just because we think it's valuable doesn't mean our customers do. And it's only until we actually release it that we can find out. And that's why that ability to innovate and time to market are such powerful leading measures, where your ability to innovate, how much new stuff can you work on instead of maintaining or building on old stuff, and your ability to actually get it out the door, right? Your ability to actually finish work, get it done and release it, are fantastic leading indicators for potential future value being delivered. But they are leading indicators, but they're not guaranteed indicators. Just because you're releasing something does not mean you will deliver more value. And that's where this is tricky, because that means you're actually going to have to inspect and adapt if you have the right measures in place as well. You might have thought you were measuring the right things, but as you try tweaking these things, you run experiments based on those variables, you're realizing that, tweaking that variable, tweaking that measure and improving it or reducing it, whatever, is not leading to the value or results we were expecting. Chances are that's not the right measure. You might need to think of a different thing you have to tweak, a different thing to look at and measure that you can run experiments towards going forward. And that's scary and painful, and quite frankly, it can suck sometimes, but it's an incredibly important part of what we do. I've done that stuff myself. When I started taking my business more seriously and I started producing content, I wanted to make sure I could run public courses. It's one of my favorite things to do, is to run courses teaching other people about Agile and Scrum. And I thought, you know what, how do I do this? Well, I should probably get views on my content, right? If people see my stuff, well, then they know about me, and that means they probably buy my courses. So I started running experiments towards increasing my views. And turns out the correlation was not at all what I thought it was. Views was the wrong thing to look at. One example is, well, I could have 100 views, but it could have been the same person who just left their phone on and the video was looping over and over and over again. Doesn't mean I'm going to get more of a sale, it just means they forgot their phone somewhere, right? So I had to figure out different measures to look at. And I'm still experimenting. And that's the tricky part. You have to keep experimenting, keep trying things until you find the ones that work. And guess what? They might work now, but they might no longer be the right thing to tweak later on, in which case you have to find another new measure going forward. So, to bring this all back then, is Agile fuzzy? Sure, if done badly. But it's incredibly rigorous, it's incredibly disciplined when done as intended, when done well. And when you have to make these decisions, when you have to look at this data and draw conclusions from it, depending on who you are, and depending on the environment you're working within, different people will make those decisions. If you are in a truly self-managing Scrum team that is looking after themselves, a lot of the decisions will be done within the Scrum team. If it's decisions about value, where to innovate, the product owner might be making those decisions, and they'll show those decisions in the ordering and contents of the product backlog. If it's decisions about the performance and effectiveness of the Scrum team, well, your Scrum Master is probably going to have something to say about that, and they're going to be proposing certain experiments, and they'll work together with the Scrum team and maybe the rest of the organization to make changes to that as well. And if it's changes about the quality and our ability to get things done, chances are developers will have a lot to say about that as well. And the entire Scrum team might be involved in any and all of these conversations, because guess what? We fail and succeed together when we're doing Agile working. Right? It's not about the individuals, it's about the whole. And sometimes it might even be decisions about return on investment, because maybe you're a sponsor, right? Maybe you are paying for a team to do this on your behalf, and maybe you're not seeing the returns you were hoping for, or maybe you're seeing an opportunity that you'd like them to pivot towards. And maybe that's a conversation you then have based on the data you're seeing with the Scrum team, with the product owner, and say, you know what? I'm not seeing what I was hoping to see out of this. Let's either cut it here or move to something different. So depending on your setup and depending on the kind of data you're looking at and the kind of decisions that need to be made, different people will be involved at different points. But if you've got a well-oiled machine of a Scrum team or Agile team, and they are self-managing, or maybe even a higher level of self-organizing, as mentioned in a different video, if you let them make those decisions, but they can show you the proof, so to speak, by showing you the data, fantastic. Let them, and trust that they will be able to deliver results. Trust, but validate. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Oscar with Pragmatic Shift. You can find more of our stuff under @Pragmatic Shift on all social media. I would love to be your Scrum coach. And if you're interested in working with me, you can find my courses on pragmaticshift.com or about me as a coach under scrumcoach.uk. Please do like, share, and subscribe. It really helps us out and gives us further reach to get to more professionals to help them on their journeys as well. Thank you again for watching.